There are secrets that survive the test of time, and others that time prefers to bury. I learned this the hard way, the day I stared at a painting from 40 years ago and saw something that shouldn't have been there. At first glance, it was just art. But when I looked closer, I realized that those brushstrokes hid more than beauty. They hid intentions. And perhaps confessions. My name is John Spencer, and for decades I've investigated crimes that test the mind more than courage. But this case, the case of Edgar Voss, the painter who transformed his madness into enigmas, was unlike anything I've ever seen. Each of his paintings seemed to breathe, as if waiting for the right moment to tell the truth. And when he finally did, it was too late. I always say that art and crime have more in common than we imagine. Both are born from the same impulse, the desire for eternity. But what happens when this desire surpasses the limits of humanity? When the paint mixes with blood, and the artist becomes a prisoner of their own creation? That was the question that haunted me, and perhaps still haunts me. And before we dive into the story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? You never know, I might have already solved the case somewhere. I never trusted coincidences, especially when they appear framed and hanging in an expensive gallery. That night began like any other, until the phone rang. On the other end, the trembling voice of an art curator told me about the discovery of new works by a painter who died decades ago. It seemed simple: catalog, authenticate, move on. But when she mentioned patterns hidden beneath the paint, something inside me ignited. I went to the gallery more out of curiosity than duty. The atmosphere reeked of fresh varnish and barely contained secrets. The canvases stood there, silent, staring at anyone who dared to look for too long. The painter, dead 40 years ago, still seemed to whisper through the crooked brushstrokes and the lost gazes in each portrait. And it was there, amidst that unsettling beauty, that I realized there was a code waiting to be deciphered. While the curator spoke about colors and art schools, my eyes scanned the paintings, searching for something that deviated from the norm, a mistake, a repetition, a message. The shadows seemed too intentional, the colors too cold. Even the positioning of the frames seemed to follow a mathematical logic. It wasn't art. It was language. A language that someone was still trying to use. That night, I felt the same shiver that precedes cases that change everything. The kind of mystery that doesn't fit into reports or end with a signature. Before leaving, I leaned against the frame of the main painting. The wood was still warm, as if the painter had just put down his brush. And somehow, I had the feeling that this story was only just beginning. His name was Edgar Voss, a painter who gained fame in the 1970s for transforming anguish into color. His works were dense, almost suffocating, as if each brushstroke hid a confession. They said he saw the world in fragments, pieces of reality that he tried to stitch together on the canvas. And the more he tried, the darker his universe became. He was found dead in his studio, surrounded by paints and silence. The police called it an overdose. I call it convenience. The body was cremated too quickly. The death certificate filled out hastily. No full autopsy, no questioning. It was the perfect end for a tormented artist. And perhaps that's what everyone wanted to believe. But throughout my career, I've learned that when something ends too quickly, it's because someone is in a hurry to hide the rest. Digging deeper, I found old reviews, interviews, and letters exchanged with other artists. In all of them, the same pattern. Voss spoke about encoding truth in art, about keeping alive the voice of the silenced. He seemed obsessed with the idea of leaving hidden messages, as if he knew that one day someone would need to find them. Perhaps he foresaw what was to come. Voss's photographs. His gaze wasn't directed at the camera, but at the background of the painting behind him, as if he were observing someone or something. And at that moment, I felt that his death was only the first layer of a much larger painting. Her name was Clara Mendel, and her voice had the kind of urgency that doesn't belong in the art world. She said she worked restoring Edgar Voss's works, and that, while cleaning one of the canvases, she found something unusual under the layer of paint. Repeated symbols, numbers disguised among the strokes, almost imperceptible. "It's not by chance," she assured me. "It's code." And that's when the mystery took shape. When I arrived at the studio where she kept the paintings, the air smelled of turpentine and fear. Clara showed me the paintings one by one, as if presenting witnesses. In some, the eyes of the subjects seemed to follow our movements. In others, the perspective betrayed logic, as if the painter had played with dimensions. And in the lower corner, between the varnish and the shadow, there were the symbols, discreet but unsettling. "Have you shown this to the police yet?" I asked. She shook her head with a nervous smile. "They'd say it's an artist's delusion." I understood immediately. There was something there that didn't fit into the rational world. And if Voss really had left hidden messages, perhaps it wasn't just art he wanted to preserve. Perhaps it was a secret too dangerous to reveal in his lifetime. I noted every detail, took photos, and brought a digital copy of the paintings to analyze later. But something about Clara intrigued me. She seemed to know more than she was saying. While she spoke, she would look away from the canvases, as if afraid of being watched in return. And, somehow, I had the strange feeling that I wasn't the only one investigating this case. Someone, somewhere, was also watching me. I spent days analyzing those works in silence, like someone trying to converse with a dead person. Each of Voss's paintings seemed to scream in a different way. Distorted faces, unfinished bodies, shadows that repeated themselves like visual echoes. It was art, yes, but it was also calculation. The geometry of the lines followed a logic too precise to be intuitive. And that's when I realized. The distortions didn't hide error, they hid intention. I placed one of the canvases under a magnifying glass and counted the brushstrokes around one of the eyes. 34. The same number appeared in another painting, on the frame, and then in a disguised symbol among the strokes. 34, always the same number. It was as if the painter had left a numerical trail, a sequence that formed a secret pattern. And when I tried to decipher it, I realized that his signature also changed slightly in each painting. In the first painting, Edgar's E was long and elegant. In the second, it almost looked like a spiral. In the third, a line cut across the middle of the letter, a division, perhaps a message. It couldn't have been accidental. Someone was encoding something within the artist's own identity, letter by letter, canvas by canvas. I began comparing the old signatures with the new ones, and the more I observed, the more the differences screamed at me. But what kept me awake that night wasn't the numbers, nor the signatures. It was the gaze. In every painting, without exception, there was a pair of eyes that didn't belong to any portrait, any form. Eyes that seemed to stare at me, hidden among shadows, painted in imperceptible scales. And for the first time in years, I felt fear not of the mystery, but of the feeling that someone even dead was still watching me back. I decided to try something simple. I changed the lighting. Sometimes, the truth reveals itself from a right angle. And with Voss, nothing seemed to be by chance. I used a cold light flashlight, moving it slowly across the surface of the painting. Gradually, invisible layers began to emerge. Tiny, almost imperceptible reflections formed different lines beneath the varnish. Letters, numbers, and suddenly, the painting that had previously seemed merely an artistic expression transformed into a meticulous enigma. I noted down each symbol, each sequence, and organized them in a makeshift spreadsheet. The letters repeated with precise spacing. The numbers followed an almost musical rhythm. There was order there, a deliberate message, hidden amidst the chaos of the ink. I spent hours trying to find meaning until, when I aligned everything in sequence, the impossible happened. They formed coordinates, perfect latitude and longitude, pointing to an isolated point outside the city. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But coincidences, I've learned, are the truth's favorite excuse. I plotted the numbers on the map and saw the location appear before me. An old house, hidden in the countryside, abandoned for decades. The same property where Voss lived his last years. Art, it seemed, was inviting me to a reunion with the past. I looked at the paintings again, now with a new perspective. It was as if Voss had left a map within the work itself, a path that only someone obsessed enough to hear its colors could follow. I closed the folder, turned off the lights, and thought, perhaps the painter wasn't trying to hide something. Perhaps he was trying to be found. The road to the address indicated by the coordinates seemed endless. The GPS fluctuated, the cell phone signal disappeared, and the wind brought a cold that wasn't just physical. When I finally spotted the house, I understood why it had been forgotten. The windows were covered in dust, the wood rotted with age, and vegetation swallowed. What remained of the fence? It was the kind of place where silence screams. And at that moment, I realized I was entering the last scene of Edgar Voss. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. She groaned as if complaining about the visit. The smell of mold mixed with old paint hit me immediately. There were stacks of canvases, open books, notes scattered on the floor. Each wall was an unfinished confession. The same symbols from the gallery paintings were there, scribbled on the margins of yellow sheets, repeated ad nauseum. They seemed more like an obsession than an inspiration. I walked carefully, observing everything by the light of my flashlight. I found unfinished portraits with blurred faces, as if the painter had given up mid-expression. One of the paintings showed a figure with its back turned, looking out a window. And curiously, the view depicted was the same one I had before me at that moment. It was as if he had painted his own gaze upon the present. The past and the present blended together in the same frame. That's when I saw something that stopped me for a few seconds, a word written several times on the wall in dark, dry ink. Listen. Just that. No context, no explanation. Listen. The house was silent, but the message seemed to pulse in the air, as if Voss's voice still echoed through the cracks. And for some reason, I felt that what I needed to find there was still whispering, waiting to be deciphered. I returned to the office with my head spinning. With each new discovery, the case seemed to expand like a web. I decided to investigate the period when Voss lived in that house, and that's when the records started screaming. Between 1974 and 1977, 3 people disappeared in the region, all without a trace. The most curious thing? They were all models, art students who posed for local painters. No vodias, no clues. Just silence and unfinished portraits. I requested access to the old police files, the kind of paper that smells of mold and neglect. Voss's name appeared discreetly in some testimonies, but never as a suspect. Reclusive artist, they said. Man of sensitive genius. No one suspected that his genius might conceal something darker. The more I read, the clearer the connection became. The disappearances began precisely when he isolated himself, and ceased soon after his death. In the old photos, I found familiar faces, young people with the same kind of look that appeared in his paintings. It was as if Voss had immortalized them on canvas before they vanished from the map. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the similarities were too striking to ignore. And amidst the records, one detail made me stop. One of the victims had last been seen entering the country house. The same one I had just visited. I picked up one of the photos, placed it next to an unfinished portrait I'd found in the studio, and the shock was immediate. It was her. The same face, the same features, only distorted by the paint. Suddenly, the paintings ceased to be art. They became silent testimonies of something no one dared to investigate. And at that moment, I realized that perhaps Voss's code wasn't just symbolic, but a desperate attempt to confess what she never managed to say in life. I returned to the country house, this time with the feeling that something awaited me. Rummaging through the drawers of the old studio, I found a notebook with a worn cover, stained with ink and dampness. The fragile pages seemed about to fall apart at the touch. However, there were Edgar Voss's words, crooked, hurried, almost feverish. It was more than a diary. It seemed like a record of someone trying to fight against their own mind. The first notes spoke of art and transcendence. Voss believed that painting was a way of deciphering the invisible, of purifying the gaze from the corrupted world. But as the pages progressed, the tone changed. Fragmented phrases emerged, crossed out words, repetitions bordering on delirium. He spoke of voices and the colors, of faces that returned when the brush stopped. It was as if the artist had immersed himself too deeply in his own creation and begun to lose himself in it. On one of the pages, a sentence chilled me. Art is the only crime the world applauds. The handwriting trembled, as if the author were possessed by something that overwhelmed him. Just below, a sequence of numbers and crossed-out letters caught my attention, the same pattern I found in the paintings. Voss seemed to be trying to organize something, a truth he himself couldn't bear. Perhaps he wasn't confessing. Perhaps he was asking for help. I kept reading until the end. The last page was practically illegible, but one word still stood out among the ink stains. Save them. No context, no names, just a plea. I closed the journal and took a deep breath. Voss's art wasn't just about beauty or madness. It was about redemption. And somehow, I had just entered the same labyrinth that consumed him. Voss's case belonged to the past, but the past has a nasty habit. It always finds a way to come back. 3 days after I analyzed the diary, I received a call from the local police. A strange crime scene had been discovered, a woman found in an abandoned warehouse, her body positioned with almost theatrical precision. And most disturbingly, the scene imitated one of Voss's paintings. Brushstrokes of red paint on the floor, symbols drawn on the walls. A faithful copy. I went to the location. The air was thick, heavy. The cameras flickered under the cold light, capturing every detail of that morbid staging. The body seemed not to have been left there carelessly, but exposed as part of an installation. In the corner, a signature made with dried blood, a spiraled E. The same E that Voss used when his art began to change. It was impossible to ignore. Someone was reviving the painter. And his ghosts. I analyzed the scene with the clinical eye of someone who has seen the worst. The paints used were identical to those I found in the studio. The arrangement of the objects followed the same geometric pattern as the works. And there was more. The victim's body had a mark on the wrist, something that seemed engraved, not tattooed. When I brought the flashlight closer, I recognized the symbol. It was the same one Voss repeated in his diary. A direct link between past and present. As I examined the body, a question began to hammer in my head. What if someone had deciphered the code before me? A disciple, perhaps. An admirer obsessed enough to transform art into ritual. Suddenly, the case ceased to be merely an investigation into a dead painter. It became a race against time. Because, apparently, the original artist may have passed away. But his work was alive, and someone was continuing it. I returned to the office with a churning stomach. That crime scene wouldn't leave my head. Every detail seemed calculated, as if it were a continuation of the code Voss began writing decades ago. I decided to review the paintings again, but this time, with the eyes of someone who knows what to look for. I took the enlarged photos and began to cross-reference the numbers hidden in the layers of paint. That's when the pattern began to appear. The numbers weren't there by chance. They formed a logical sequence. I connected everything in a spreadsheet, frame by frame, until I realized that each set of numbers corresponded to a specific letter. It was like an alphabet invented by a brilliant and disturbed mind. I spent hours putting the puzzle together until suddenly the message revealed itself before me, clear as a whisper from another era. Art never dies. I read it aloud, and the sentence echoed in the silence of the room, laden with a truth I didn't want to admit. Art never dies. It was more than a motto. It was a signature, a promise. As if the author, or whoever was behind this continuation, wanted to prove that Voss's death hadn't been the end, just a pause in the spectacle. I looked at the paintings and realized something almost cruel. Each one seemed like a testament, a passage for someone to continue the work. And someone had accepted the invitation. As I tried to process everything, a memory flashed through my mind. In Voss's diary, he used that same phrase, written at the bottom of a torn page. Now it returned like a fulfilled prophecy. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall covered in clippings and photos. If art never dies, then what was before me was no ordinary occurrence. It was an inheritance. And somehow, I had become a part of it. I spent the night awake, revisiting every detail of the case like someone trying to decipher a recurring dream. If Voss had left a legacy, someone was interpreting it literally, transforming his art into rituals. I began to profile the culprit. It wasn't an ordinary killer. It was someone meticulous, educated, probably with an artistic background. Someone who saw the act of killing as an extension of creation. For him, each crime was a canvas, and each victim a brushstroke. In the psychological reports I consulted, this type of mind is usually defined by symbolic obsession. The killer doesn't kill out of anger or pleasure, but for purpose. He believes he is fulfilling a mission, something greater than himself. I analyzed the patterns, the colors chosen, the symmetry in the scenes. Everything indicated that the author wanted to be seen, wanted to be understood. And the most unsettling thing is that he seemed to speak to me through the work. I began comparing the handwriting of the symbols found in the scenes with those in Voss's diary. The similarities were striking, but there was a subtle, almost imperceptible difference, as if someone had learned to imitate but not to feel. It was the kind of detail that gives away a follower, not the master. This confirmed my suspicion. The murderer was a disciple, a devoted fan who believed he was continuing the great work of his idol. While organizing my notes, a phrase came to mind, and I confess it startled me with its clarity. Art never dies, but sometimes it kills to live. The killer's obsession wasn't merely aesthetic, it was philosophical. He believed he was giving life to Voss's message. And at that moment, I realized I wasn't dealing with just someone dangerous, but with someone who saw himself as the chosen one of a dead master. I learned a long time ago not to mix the past with the present. But the problem is that the past doesn't ask permission to return. With each new clue, something inside me stirred, like a scar that decides to burn without warning. This case reminded me of another, old one I never managed to close. An artist too, but of a different kind. The kind who painted with blood and left messages for me. A man who escaped. And what tormented me most was the similarity. He also believed he was purifying the world. I remember the last time I saw him, an alley, heavy rain, the sound of sirens echoing too far away. I almost caught him. Almost. But almost is the word that weighs most heavily when you work with lives. He disappeared, and with him went part of my trust. Since then, every difficult case is a vivid reminder of what I lost that day. And now, seeing Voss's work and the current crimes, something inside me told me that the stories were more connected than they seemed. I started dreaming of distorted faces, the same expressions as in the paintings. I would wake up sweating, with the feeling that there was something I was forgetting. Sometimes it's dangerous when the mind mixes memories with clues. I knew this, but even so, I went ahead. Maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of guilt. Part of me wanted to solve Voss's case not for justice, but for redemption. While reviewing old files, I found a coincidence that paralyzed me. A familiar name on the art student list from that time. The same man who escaped years ago. It was him, the ghost I never caught. And in that instant, I understood that the past wasn't coming back to haunt me. It was coming back to finish what it started. I decided to follow the trail left by the past. I started with the people who knew Voss, former students, collectors, art critics who still idolized him as if he were a prophet. Most seemed nostalgic, but there was something unsettling in the way they spoke of him, as if Voss had been more than an artist, almost a spiritual leader. Among all the interviews, one caught my attention. A restorer named Elias Kern, polite, too eloquent to be just an enthusiast. Elias spoke of Voss with a disturbing devotion. He said that true art isn't painted, it's lived, and every sentence he uttered seemed carefully rehearsed. As we talked, I noticed he avoided eye contact, a subtle but revealing detail. I showed him photos of his works, and the man smiled in a way that chilled me to the bone. He used to say, he murmured, that art is the only crime the world applauds. That same phrase was in his diary, almost word for word. Voss's posthumous exhibition, and Elias dodged the question with long answers, full of metaphors. but empty of content. However, the more he spoke, the more I felt I was facing someone who knew too many secrets. Every detail of his gaze, every calculated pause, reminded me of the profiles I had studied throughout my career. He wasn't just remembering Voss. He was continuing something. Before leaving, I thanked him for his hospitality and shook his hand. His skin was cold, his smile restrained. When I turned around, I saw a painting hanging on the wall of his office, a perfect replica of one of Voss's works, but with an almost imperceptible difference. The shadow in the background formed a face. Me. I pretended not to notice and left, but inside, the certainty was already pulsing. Elias Kern wasn't just a fan. He was the living echo of the painter. I returned to the gallery with a knot in my stomach. Elias's words echoed in my head, and something told me that the answers had been right before my eyes all along. I picked up one of Voss's original paintings, the same one that seemed denser, heavier, as if it carried a secret within its layers of paint. This time, I decided to go beyond the obvious. I used ultraviolet light, a technique that had already revealed truths to me that time had tried to hide. When the light touched the canvas, something began to emerge. Beneath the visible colors, a second painting revealed itself. Thin, yet precise lines, outlining a face hidden beneath the varnish. Gradually, the features took shape. The nose, the chin, the fixed gaze. It wasn't Voss's, it was another man. Someone alive. I recognized him immediately. The hidden portrait was of Elias Kern. The brushstrokes betrayed him with cruel clarity, as if Voss himself had foreseen that one day we would need to look beyond the surface. I stood silent for a few seconds, staring at the face that stared back at me. It wasn't just a portrait, it was an accusation. Voss had painted his tormentor, or perhaps his most faithful disciple, and hidden him within the art itself, sealing a warning that no one noticed for decades. It was the kind of discovery that changes everything. Art, once again, was speaking, and this time, the message was personal. I called an expert to confirm the finding, and the analysis left no doubt. The lower layer dated from the painter's last phase, shortly before his death. In other words, Voss knew who was watching him, perhaps even who killed him. I turned off the light and stared at the painting in the dim light. Even invisible, I could still feel Elias's eyes on me, fixed, as if waiting for my next move. And deep down, I realized that he probably already knew what it would be. The pieces began to fall into place, albeit painfully. The last coded messages, found in the margins of the paintings and in Voss's diary, pointed to something more. An event. A place. I gathered all the coordinates, symbols, and fragments until one phrase stood out. Art will be reborn at midnight. By cross-referencing the data with records of digital invitations and encrypted messages, I discovered a secret exhibition scheduled for the following day, a clandestine event in the basement of an old, disused gallery. The location was ironic. The same gallery where Voss exhibited his last work before he died. Invitations circulated only among select collectors, signed with a familiar pseudonym, E.V. Elias Kern. His audacity was almost poetic. He was staging a spectacle, and I already knew the role I had to play in it. Reveal the masterpiece, the invitation read. This wasn't an exhibition, it was a carefully staged trap. I could have called for reinforcements, but something inside me told me this was the kind of story that needed to end on the same note it began, personally. I spent the night preparing every detail, reviewing the symbols, trying to anticipate the killer's next moves. Every clue, every word from Voss, seemed to lead me to that inevitable point. The art, after all, had written its own script, and I was the missing character. The following morning, the sun seemed to mock my anxiety. The city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the fact that, at midnight, someone planned to turn death into a spectacle. The phrase from the invitation wouldn't leave my mind. Art will be reborn. I closed Voss's diary, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and thought, perhaps he was right all along. Perhaps art truly never dies, it just changes bodies. I arrived at the old gallery minutes before midnight, wearing a dark coat and a hat that hid half my face. The place was lit only by makeshift spotlights, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air smelled of fresh paint and arrogance. Gradually, people began to arrive, collectors, critics, curious onlookers. And there he was, Elias Kern, in the center of the room, with the same serene smile of someone who believes he is about to make history. He spoke to the audience like a conductor of a macabre concert. "Today, art is resurrected," he said, gesturing in front of a screen covered by a white sheet. His voice had a strange mixture of religious fervor and vanity. I watched from afar, maintaining the posture of a spectator, but with my heart pounding erratically. Everything in me screamed that this would be the final act, the climax of a carefully orchestrated madness. When the clock struck midnight, Elias pulled back the sheet with a theatrical gesture. The crowd held its breath. Before them, a huge painting revealed a familiar scene, a faithful reproduction of the recent crime. And in the corner of the painting, painted in dark ink, was something new, my portrait. "He's here," Elias announced, turning to the audience. "The man who doesn't understand the beauty of death." At that moment, the disguise no longer mattered. I stepped through the crowd, weapon firmly in one hand, doubt in the other. Elias looked at me and smiled, serene, almost emotional. "You came," he murmured. "I painted all this for you." Before I could answer, he pulled out a lighter and lit it in front of the canvas. The fire rose quickly, consuming paint, wood, and secrets. The crowd rushed, chaos took over the hall, and I realized the exhibition was far from over. It was merely changing stages. The fire spread with almost symbolic speed, as if hell had been rehearsed for that moment. Flames climbed the walls covered in paintings, distorting faces and transforming colors into screams. Elias walked among them with a terrifying calm, his eyes shining with ecstasy. "Art needs to die to be reborn," he shouted, as the ceiling began to collapse. I followed him through the smoke, trying to see something beyond the flames that devoured everything around us. The gallery now resembled a living painting, a mixture of beauty and destruction. Glass shattered, frames broke, and the air burned in our lungs. Elias stopped before a final canvas, Voss's self-portrait, and ran his hand over the painting as if bidding farewell to an old friend. "He chose me," he whispered, gazing at the fire as if it were an altar. "I am his rebirth." I took another step and pointed my gun. "No. You are merely the echo of a mind that tried to escape itself." He laughed, a short, broken laugh. "You don't understand, Spencer. He left the code for me, not for you." A crack echoed as a beam fell near us. The smoke made the air almost solid. For a moment, I thought about pulling the trigger, but something held me back. Elias held the lighter like a trophy, and when I pressed it against my chest, I realized he didn't intend to run. "All art needs an ending," he murmured, and pressed the button. The explosion engulfed him in seconds. The wave of heat threw me to the ground. The deafening sound swept through the hall, and everything became light and smoke. Instinctively, I dragged myself outside, taking with me only Voss's diary that was on the table. Outside, the cold of the early morning hit me like a punch. Behind me, the gallery burned until it turned to silence. Elias Kern had achieved his conclusion. But something told me the plot wasn't complete yet. The firefighters arrived when the building was already nothing but ashes and a memory. The smoke rose slowly, as if the fire were still secretly breathing. I sat on the sidewalk, watching the chaos transform into silence. The rescue team brought back few things intact, pieces of frames, fragments of glass, 1 or 2 charred canvases. But among the wreckage, one painting caught my attention. An almost intact painting, protected by chance or by something that seemed more than luck. I took the artwork to the lab, my hands still covered in soot. Beneath the dirt, the style was unmistakable. Edgar Voss. A somber portrait, with a hooded man in the background and a gaze that seemed to follow me from every angle. But what really caught my attention was the almost invisible detail in the lower corner, a set of tiny lines, arranged like coordinates. I repeated the previous process, ultraviolet light, digital enlargement, and there they were, more symbols, more numbers, more questions. I analyzed the signature. It wasn't just E. Voss. There was a small, almost imperceptible additional stroke, transforming the E into a hybrid letter, something between E and L. The pattern led me to a hypothesis I preferred not to believe. What if the original painter had never died? Or worse, what if someone had continued his work while he was still alive, observing everything from the shadows? The idea seemed absurd, but at that point, the absurd was already part of my daily life. As I observed the painting under the light, I felt the same sensation as when I touched the first one. The warm wood, the heavy air, the feeling that something or someone was still there. I carefully closed the painting case and took a deep breath. Perhaps Elias wasn't the end, just an intermediary. And perhaps the true artist was still nearby, waiting for the right moment to sign his final work. In the following days, the city returned to normal, or at least pretended to. The gallery made headlines for a week, then faded into oblivion, like all scandals that time swallows. I continued working, but something within me had changed. The Voss and Elias case wasn't just an investigation, it was a mirror. A reminder that there are boundaries the human mind shouldn't cross, especially when trying to translate emotion into perfection. Sometimes, the search for truth only serves to reveal what we prefer not to see. I spent nights looking at the painting that survived the fire. The brushstrokes seemed to change with the light. Every detail hid an echo of something greater, as if the art were breathing. I thought of Voss, of Elias, of all the lost faces that became part of that narrative. In the end, I realized that everyone, victims, murderers, even myself, were just pieces of a painting that never ends. A story where the artist and the observer exchange places until there is no difference between them. I remember the phrase in the diary, "Art is the only crime the world applauds." It took me a while to understand what he meant. Perhaps because, deep down, art and crime share the same essence, the desire for eternity. Both want to leave their mark, even if it costs everything. And Voss, in some way, succeeded. His work continues to live on, not in museums, but in the minds of those who touched it, including mine. Today, when I close a case, I avoid thinking about redemption. I prefer to think about learning. What I saw in that studio, in that burning gallery, wasn't just madness or genius, it was raw humanity, painted with the colors of guilt and desire. And as I look at the painting once more, I can't help but think, sometimes art doesn't reveal the truth. It reveals what the truth tries to hide. I thought the case had ended there, with fire, silence, and a painting half-burned. But fate loves unfinished endings. One morning, amidst reports and cups of cold coffee, a letter appeared on my desk. No return address, no stamp, no fingerprints. The envelope was made of old, yellowed paper, the kind they don't make anymore. Inside, a single sheet folded in four, with something written in dark ink, firm and calm, as if whoever wrote it knew exactly the effect it would have. I opened it slowly, without haste, but with my heart pounding to the rhythm of a premonition. The handwriting was elegant, precise, too similar to Voss', but not identical. Just one sentence. No context, no signature. I read it once, twice, 3 times, feeling the air grow heavier with each repetition. You have only deciphered the first layer. The sound of the words seemed to echo, even in the silence of the office. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that old shiver of doubt, the one that warns that the story is not yet over. I placed the letter on the table and observed the reflection of the light on the paper. There was something beneath the ink, an almost invisible mark. I picked up the ultraviolet lamp, the same one I used with Voss' paintings, and slowly passed it over the text. A symbol began to emerge, discreet, almost playful. The same one that appeared in the painter's works. It was like a nod, an invitation. And in that instant, I realized that someone somewhere was still playing with me. I put the letter in the drawer and stared out the window. Outside, the day went on as if nothing had happened. But I knew the game had begun again. I took a deep breath and murmured, almost smiling, "Well, let's see what's on the second layer." Because deep down I've understood this long ago. In some cases, the truth isn't discovered. It reveals itself when it wants to be found. Ultimately, each case leaves a mark, some visible, others not. Edgar Voss's case taught me that the truth rarely reveals itself in its entirety. Sometimes it hides between the lines, in the shadows of a painting, or in the pauses of a sentence. The danger lies in thinking we've seen everything, when in reality, we've only glimpsed the first layer. I also learned that evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It disguises itself as beauty, as genius, as art. And that's precisely when it becomes most dangerous, when it manages to enchant us. Voss believed that art could purify the soul. But perhaps, deep down, he only wanted to free himself from it. And in the process, he trapped us all within the same frame. I often say that investigating is like painting. Each clue is a stroke, each doubt a shadow. And, in the end, the picture never turns out exactly as we imagine. The case closes, but the feeling of incompleteness remains. Perhaps because some truths are not meant to be resolved, only observed. If this story made you think, then it was worth telling. And if you want to keep up with future investigations, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are still many cases waiting to be deciphered. And I'll be there when the next code appears.